Good evening, Mr. Josh Rotenberg. How you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
Doing well. So a lot to get through that's happening around Washington. So U.S. officials are actually learning more about the Chinese spy balloon that was shot down last weekend. Do we have any updates on information gathered?
Yeah, so the State Department and the Defense Department say that China had the capability to intercept U.S. communications and that this one balloon was part of a much broader spying operation by China that spanned more than 40 countries over 5 continents, which is very concerning. And Republicans on Capitol Hill who were briefed on this matter were criticizing the Biden administration for not shooting this balloon down sooner, knowing those facts. And when you talk about what the president wanted to do and what the administration wanted to do, they wanted to shoot this balloon down as soon as possible. However, it was the military who said that it would not be safe to do over land, and that's why they waited till it got over the Atlantic Ocean just off the coast of South Carolina over the weekend. Now, Democrats were a little bit more understanding when it comes to this issue, but again, there are a lot of polarization surrounding this topic. We're obviously going to learn a lot more because the FBI is only reviewing initial debris that it has at its lab in Quantico, and a lot is still remaining in the Atlantic Ocean that they're hoping to collect.
All right, we'll continue to keep our eyes and ears peeled for any updates regarding information that could be gathered from there. In the meantime, let's go to news in the House. So the new House Select Subcommittee on the Weaponization of the Federal Government held its first hearing today. What were the highlights out of that hearing?
Yeah, so there were a number of current and former lawmakers. There were a number of former FBI agents and legal experts that testified. And when you talk about the Republicans that testified, they testified to exactly why this committee exists in the first place. They tried to claim that there's a politicization when it comes to the Department of Justice and the FBI, when it comes to the handling of those departments and going after Republicans, and also when it comes to the media trying to silence conservatives and critics on the right side. Now, Democrats are not having any of that when it comes to the premise of those accusations and also this entire subcommittee. Then you have the White House, who put out a memo today who basically labeled this committee as a Fox News committee and a political stunt. And so this is clearly red meat that Kevin McCarthy and Ohio Congressman Jim Jordan is feeding to the Republican base, and Democrats are going to fight this every step of the way.
Speaking of those House Democrats, they unveiled a resolution to expel Congressman George Santos today. What are the odds of that actually working?
Yeah, so if Kevin McCarthy's on board, then this could be pretty expedited, but he's not right now. He has not called on George Santos to resign. And so as of right now, this expulsion resolution was introduced, and it's going to go to the House Ethics Committee, where that investigation into Santos is going to ultimately take place. And if indeed it's recommended and this expulsion resolution gets to the House floor, it remains to be seen whether McCarthy would put it on the floor. Now, House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries could force what's called a privilege motion, which would bring this up for a vote. Now, you need 2/3 of the House to expel a member of Congress, and it's unclear if Republicans would do that. Remember, they only have a 4-seat majority right now. But Jeffries and Democrats, even if the votes aren't there, they want to put this on the floor, and they want this put to a vote because they want Republicans on the record when it comes to how they feel about George Santos being a member of Congress. Now, Santos himself doubled down today. He said that he is not going to resign. He, of course, took himself off of committees, at least out loud. There was some communication with Kevin McCarthy behind the scenes. But as of right now, it's really a toss-up whether or not this would actually work out. Santos has said he's not going to resign, but it's pretty clear that he's facing a number of investigations, whether it's from New York, the federal government, and also in Brazil when it comes to campaign finances and potential fraud. And so Santos is pretty embattled as it is. Whether he gets expelled or not, that remains to be seen.
Right, with that latest being words exchanged at the State of the Union address with Mitt Romney. Now, speaking of that State of the Union address, President Biden continued that post-State of the Union address blitz, speaking in Florida today. What was his focus there?
Yeah, so he was focused on Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid, which was, if you remember watching the State of the Union, that was one of the contentious parts on the House floor. That's when a number of Republicans called President Biden a liar because he accused some of them of trying to eliminate Social Security and Medicaid. And so when he went to Florida today, on every one of the seats for those in attendance was a pamphlet of Senator Rick Scott, a Republican who wanted to be the Senate Minority Leader. here, there was a pamphlet of his campaign. And in that was a proposal where he said he wanted to sunset or eliminate every piece of federal legislation within 5 years. And only it would get reauthorized by Congress, which would be the only way that it would remain in existence. That included Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid. So when President Biden was talking about the Republicans the other night about who ultimately wanted to get rid of these entitlement things, he was talking about Senator Rick Scott. He was also talking about Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, who in the past has talked about privatizing Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid. Now, keep this in mind as well. He went to Florida as an unofficial campaign stop. It's a very important state for Democrats to try to win back in 2024. In 2020, President Biden lost this state by nearly 400,000 votes. He lost the older vote, the elderly vote, the senior vote by 10 points. In 2022, for the midterms, Ron DeSantis won this state by 20 points. He won re-election by 20 points. Republicans also have a 300,000 to 400,000 voter registration advantage. And so Democrats really want to spend a lot of time, and they're going to ultimately end up spending a lot of money trying to win this state back. And also keep in mind, President Biden's two biggest challengers to re-election would be former President Donald Trump, who is a Florida resident, and we also expect Governor Ron DeSantis to get into the race, but not until the summertime.
A lot of ground left to cover for all three of those big names. Let's transition a little bit to some international news now. The death toll continues to rise after the disastrous earthquake in Turkey and in Syria. Do you have the latest numbers for us there?
Yeah, that number is now more than 21,000, which is just remarkable from a 7.8 magnitude earthquake that hit Turkey and Syria. We know that the United States has sent more than $85 million in humanitarian aid, and officials over there in Turkey and Syria say that it's desperately needed because the people there that at least have survived are surviving on the street right now, and the conditions over there are only getting worse. We also know that the United States has sent first responders to try to help with rescue efforts and recovery efforts. And we know that this situation is going to get a lot worse before it gets a lot better. And so we're obviously keeping an eye on this right now. But that number is north of 21,000 right now, which is just simply remarkable.
All right, once again, I want to thank you, Josh Rothenberg, East Texas News Washington correspondent, for joining us this evening. And I look forward to talking to you again soon.
Thanks for having me.